Just gonna finish this book today. So I can. Number 9, chapter 9, the open drawer. This is the last chapter in the book. How's it going for you today? We got outside for a minute, got to walk down, look at the ocean, stay far away from other people who were outside. Walked the dogs, had a little fresh air for lunch, came back. I just wrote this email to this person who we did, but everybody in their restaurant's been laid off, and but my closing line in this email, wishing you comfort as you hang on to hope. And that made me want to reach for some. Mercy started to leach out of me when I was 5 years old at the channel between the Bolinas Lagoon and Stinson Beach. I began to shove mercy and trust into a drawer as instructed by my parents one late afternoon in 1959 at the skinny portal between the lagoon and the ocean when I was attacked. I was with my tall, handsome father fishing at the seawall that ran above the treacherous rocks and muscular waters of the channel. My brother Stevie was 1 month old at home with our mother. I was running around, playing on the rocks and the weedy dirt where the wall ended. Seals cruised up and down, eyeing us humans curiously. There were a few fishermen beside my dad. They usually pulled up tangles of seaweed. I was not allowed out of my father's sight. Once a dog got stuck out to sea there, so much can happen and change on a dime in that rough and constricted space. I was all innocence and playful curiosity that day, a budding scientist, nose in the weeds, studying bugs. I might have put away my merciful disposition a few weeks later anyway, when kindergarten began, with the bullying on the blacktop that started as soon as the older boys gleefully noticed how frizzy my hair was. On this particular day, my dad had fallen into conversation with another fisherman who was older, balding, wearing glasses. They stood side by side, each with a pole in one hand, a beer in the other. My father had binoculars around his neck to admire the white pelicans above us, the birds on the beach to our right, plovers and sandpipers, egrets on the Stinson shore across the water. As my father and the older man were talking, I came close to check in. The man looked over his shoulder, saw me, and asked Dad, "Is that your daughter?" My father smiled and nodded. The man said, "Where'd she get that hair?" Then he used the most evil word on earth in a declaration about who must have been hiding in the woodpile. And my dad, the love of my life, my civil rights marching dad, laughed. I don't know how I knew that this was an attack. I did not know this other man was disgusting, did not know about the pornography of institutionalized racism, or that any man, even an idiot, sometimes counted more to my father than his daughter. I knew only that they were laughing at me, that I had done something wrong, something illicit, or more likely, that I was something wrong. They went back to fishing. My dad did not wink at me or roll his eyes to show that the guy was an ignorant jerk, that his words meant nothing. Rather, on the way home, noticing my cringing state, he suggested I get a thicker skin. This would turn out to be the battle cry of my childhood. I should have thicker skin, i.e., just be someone else entirely. That was all I remember about that day. But I was no longer the same girl who had clambered into the back seat of our Dodge that morning. What went in the drawer that day, besides innocence, the child's assumption that the people who were with one's parents were safe, and curiosity. Not long after, I began getting migraines and a wicked sense of humor. We came into this life so generous, alive, unarmored, and curious in the best, silliest, most fixated, life-giving way. 57 years after that day, and 10 miles away from that beach, a very depressed teenage friend had to take a leave of absence 2 months before the end of her freshman year in college. She was beautiful, with thick, silky hair and long legs, squashed by school, her family, the culture of beauty and success, and her own bad brain. She had taken to cutting. She could hardly stand to be awake. Her parents offered her refuge without demands or their hot breath on her neck. She slept a lot and read graphic novels. Then one day, out in the garage, looking for a box of her early poetry, she found an empty aquarium. And so much came back to her: wonder, focus, caring. She filled the aquarium with water and tadpoles from a local pond. The water looked so awful and unappetizing, but it was the water the tadpoles knew, and they thrived. They're fascinating in a spermy sort of way, with bulges below their heads that are going to be legs. Down the road, the legs will appear and the tails will disappear. Not zoop, but slowly and clumsily from under the bulge of skin. They're black, plump, and shiny, the size of papaya seeds. Then the young woman did the most terrifying thing of all. She made a mistake. She added too much boiled spinach. The water began to look something out of the Lord of the Rings or pea soup. The tadpoles developed white stuff on their bodies. She worried they could die. She had fouled the pond water through her own zeal. But God is merciful, and the girl was smart and resourceful, so she scooped out much of the spinach and diluted the water with more pond water. A few tadpoles died all at once, but somehow she did not take the deaths as hard proof that she was defective. She made a trumpet mouthpiece of her fist, played taps, moved on. You got to see the girl's heart and attentiveness, just as when she'd been a child, dreaming of a future as a scientist, studying this thrilling stuff, a microcosm of creation, where you can actually see what happens in creation with your very own eyes. Other people, not paying attention, could see the tadpole and the frog, but she wanted to see in between, like the silence between musical notes where the mystery is. When the tadpoles grew legs, she started feeding them mealworms. When they turned into frogs the size of her pinky fingernail, she returned them to the pond on the grassier side, where there was cover and shade from the sun and predators. Mercy as shade. She went back to the pond for another generation of tadpoles. She was able to feel joyous responsibility again for the first time in a while. She talked incessantly about the tadpoles with excitement and worry. We could see the bright kid again, the eccentric, brilliant, curious scientist, 8 years old. Here with these tadpoles in murky water was a clear channel. Here was a tiny future that she could possibly work with again. Mercy creates a future for the downtrodden, hopeless, and hungry. The book of Ruth tells the story of a young Moabite woman's love for her Jewish mother-in-law, Naomi, after the death of Naomi's sons, one of whom was Ruth's husband. Ruth's love and loyalty induced her to leave her homeland. Where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God, and your people, my people. She accompanied Naomi back to the land of Israel across the Jordan River. Ruth was a survivor. She adjusted in chaos to new surroundings and found a job as a farm worker, willing to be a gleaner in the fields, gathering up leftover grain and grapes so she and Naomi could eat. Ruth was very real. She'd been slapped around by life. She was practical and faithful. We'll eat. There's a roof over our heads. We'll be friendly to each other. Such blessing. Her devotion, loyalty, and hard work came to the attention of a Jewish landowner named Boaz, who had instructed his laborers to leave behind extra grain in the field. Gleaning creates a larger consciousness that we are all in this together, symbiotically. It's an infinitely more merciful theory than trickle down, where we'll collect everything and keep the best on top, and maybe some will spill over for the bootstrap people to fight over. No, the wheat, the grapes are already there. Just don't take them all. Always leave some behind. Goodness and hope can come out of that in the smallest gestures, sharing some of your food, picking up litter, helping search for the lost, welcoming home the found. Then you have open doors that have been shut with moments of holy kindness and generosity in which we see the outreach of God or goodness. We see loving destiny. Boaz marries Ruth. They become King David's great-grandparents. Ruth is one of 4 women listed by name in Matthew's messianic genealogy from Abraham to Mary. I've tried to teach my Sunday school kids this as the ultimate mercy story, but they won't have it. They can't relate to Ruth, who is too pure, but they always like the story of Joseph in Genesis. Joseph of the coat of many colors, because there are evil brothers and a merciful hero to whom they can relate, and best of all, blood. Joseph's brothers, jealous of their father's love for him and disturbed by his creepy prophetic dreams, sold him into Egyptian slavery as a child. They killed a goat and poured its blood onto his beautiful coat and showed it to their father Jacob as proof that his most beloved son had been killed by wild beasts. This is why the kids love the story. Joseph ended up in Pharaoh's court, and because of his prophetic dreams, slowly rose to be the powerful food czar in the court. He saved Egypt and the surrounding countries from famine. His brothers, starving in nearby Canaan, came to Egypt seeking food, and when it was their turn to petition Joseph, they didn't recognize him. He recognized them. It was very harsh at first until they spoke of his father and youngest brother, the baby Benjamin. Then his heart softened. He showed them mercy on steroids. First, he forgave them, and then he gave them a future. They had made him homeless, but he gave them a home near him in Pharaoh's favor. They went back to Canaan for Jacob and Benjamin, and the family was made whole again. Mercy began as forgiveness and then became, here's the food you need, and why don't you put your roots down here? Mercy is, let's be brothers again. Let's sit at table. Joseph was in tears of grief and love at the end of the story with the men who destroyed his life and his father's. He showed the brothers who they were as beloved and cared for as the youngest. And the story shows how we were too, before we put away childish things. Forgiveness and mercy mean that bit by bit, you begin to outshine the resentment. You open the drawer that was shut and you take out the precious treasures that you hid there so long ago. And with them, the person who marvels at tadpoles, who pulls for people to come clean and then have a second chance, who aches and intervenes for those being bullied, forgives the evil brothers and unforgivable you. We are all gigantically flawed, such screw-ups. Everyone is broken, clingy, and scared, even the people who seem to have it most together. We are the brothers, and we are Joseph. Or at least we were as children. Maybe we temporarily wanted people who hurt us to be punished, but then we couldn't bear for them to suffer or to be humiliated because we saw ourselves in them. My older brother used to hit me pretty hard and get sent to his room without dinner, but I'd sneak him oranges later. 57 years after the fishing experience, the memory burbled up one day like a blob of oil in a lava lamp, and I forgave the men. I didn't mean to. It was an accident. My therapist had begun practicing a new technique where one follows the movements of light back and forth across a 2-foot bar. It's similar to hypnosis, although one is not put under into a trance. She asked me for my earliest, most traumatic memory, and I told her about my father and the fisherman. She asked how it left me feeling. I said I had felt ugly to men and thus under constant threat of attack. The doctor asked me if there was an advisor in my adult life, and I told her about a trusted woman named Robin. The doctor said to ask Robin to enter this memory. Robin scooped me up, nuzzled me, made a cooing sound that was almost Japanese. The doctor asked if I could send in a defender, and I sent in my friend Doug. He strode over to the fisherman and shoved him against the seawall. Then he looked at my dad with contempt and said, "You're a disgrace, Ken." He came over to huddle with Robin and me. My father and the fisherman looked at each other, and the man rolled his eyes while my father sighed and looked stricken. For a moment, in memory and imagination, my father understood that he needed to protect his kids better from the world, from dangerous men, and from his deeply male, obtuse self. Just for a moment, the first I was ever aware of at 62 years old. The doctor asked what I wanted to do. I followed the movement of light on the bar back and forth. For once, my first thought was not to comfort the males for their bad behavior. I just wanted out of this mess. I wanted Doug to take me home. My mom and infant brother were on my parents' bed. She was burping him. He must have just nursed. She invited me up. She was still weak after her third cesarean, so she'd brought a package of cookies to bed with her. Dad would not have liked this, as she had been quite round even before this pregnancy, when he was already picking at her about losing her weight. Stevie had graspy, translucent hands like flowery sea anemones trying to reach for me. I put my huge 5-year-old finger in his hand and it closed. What a grip! Milk drunk, he soon fell asleep, and Mom laid him in her lap so she could gather me up. She was still in her nightie. Again, Dad would not have been pleased. Her skin was as soft as soapstone. Someone said the softest things in the world overcome the hardest. And I suddenly saw and could feel in my adult heart that my father had viewed the fisherman as a harmless, hapless, jovial, ignorant redneck. He was not colluding with him, but understanding him. And I did right then. The rooms were still and quiet, the therapist's office and my mother's bedroom. Sometimes at the lagoon, the water rushes out with furious velocity, but between high and low tide, it lingers flat before flowing out to join the blue-gray ocean. I felt a crabby compassion for my father, isolated in his ego, that jocular Kennedy persona exiled from his family. And anyway, he was not the person who needed my forgiveness. Neither was the other man. God only knows, but maybe the man was saying he thought I looked like buckwheat, which I kind of did, beautiful and innocent. The men were portals, practice, training wheels. We are always the ones who need to be absolved, taken back into our hearts. I forgave myself for the fisherman's words and behavior, for taking on his ugliness and making it something I believed to be true about myself. His words had gotten on me and in me, and then I had hoarded them, building evidence that I was right about being fundamentally wrong. I forgave myself for not having nice, thick rhino skin. I shimmied him off me. I forgave myself for my father's contempt and fear of women, gently released him to himself in the same way you gently lift a hitchhiking monarch off your shoulder in a butterfly pavilion. I curled up with Mom and Stevie. My mother had beautiful English skin and long dark hair, but these aren't who she was any more than my hair was who I was. We are the final inside nesting doll. A baby feels and smells like God. You can get information from any point on a baby's body, the toes, the soft spot, and this information is life, merciful energy, unruined radiance. Babies are waves, mosaic chips in the unified field. It is possible, since skin is the largest organ of the body, that new babies don't know the inside from the outside when they first come out, that there's no difference, that they are Mobius strips. This is how we came. Wow. Talk about whole. Images of tiny things, babies, yeast, and mustard seeds can guide us. Things that grow are what change everything. Moments of compassion, giving, grief, and wonder shift our behavior, get inside us, and change realms we might not have agreed to have changed. Each field is weeds and wheat, but mix the wheat with yeast, the most ordinary of elements, and it starts changing the flour. It becomes bread, and so do we, bread to eat and bread to offer. The world keeps going on. You can have yet another cup of coffee and keep working on your plans. Or you can take the risk to be changed, surrounded, and indwelled by this strange, yeasty mash called mercy. There for the asking at the Frog Pond, the River Jordan, the channel that flows between the lagoon and the sea. She has acknowledgments for the people who helped her. And these empty blank pages, and I always feel like at the empty blank pages of a book, there is more to write for what it does inside you, to spark the writing of your own. So I will take this joy from this finished read and try and write something. Anne Lamott is the author of the New York Times bestseller Stitches, Help, Thanks, Wow, Small Victories, Some Assembly Required, Grace Eventually, Plan B, and Traveling Mercies, as well as several novels, including Imperfect Birds and Rosie. A past recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and an inductee to the California Hall of Fame, she lives in Northern California and is one of my favorite local writers. This has been Hallelujah Anyway in the Corona chapter time of the unforeseen, unforeseeable, predicted pandemic. And I think this is my day 11 of living inside and sequestered. Thanks for listening to me read to you. Tomorrow we will pick a new book. I wonder what it will be. Any requests? Put them in the comments, if you will.